All right, hello everybody. Just gathered a few things together from around the house. So just wanted to kind of go through a few things. Obviously, we've got a number of different things here. We got some pair of scissors that can come in handy. If you have any tools around the house, probably the most useful tools to you are going to be a wire cutter and a needle nose plier. This is for any sort of manipulating of a tool and making a tool. I'm going to show you guys how to make a carving tool and also how to make a needle tool. Then I've also got some thread, and if you don't have any thread around, you can also use trusty floss. Some of us have probably been eating out a little bit, local restaurants, so we've got a couple of things that we could use from there. Chopsticks. I'm going to use chopsticks as the handles for these items. Anything else that you can find around, chunks of wood, anything like that will work as well. And then also I've got an, fork and knife. These can be helpful in a lot of different ways. I've also got a couple of other things here. Oh, I forgot one up here. I've got a utility knife that can come in handy in making some of these tools. Or if you've got an X-Acto blade or any sort of blade like that, that'll work as well. Or even a kitchen knife. Any of those things will do. All right. I've got a safety pin here. Safety pin I'm going to use in the creation of the scoring tool for doing some scratching and slipping. I've also got a wine cork. You can use some other soft material for doing this. This is going to be for making a scoring tool. I've got some toothpicks, got 4 of them here. Number doesn't necessarily matter. I've got a little bit of sandpaper if you happen to have any sandpaper around. Got some glue, white glue. Any kind of white glue will do. Even a super glue will do. This is to kind of help help set the string or the floss when we're making some of our tools. I've got a ruler. Ruler is going to come in handy. My ruler that I have here is pretty clear, so I don't even know if you guys can kind of see this, but at least it gives me some measurements, and this is something that we can use in the creation of objects when we start to make some of our smaller stuff. Then for the carving tool as well, I've got a bobby pin. This seems like gold to me. I was looking in the bathroom area, came across this, and I was like, oh man, this is going to make a perfect carving tool. I'm going to show you guys how to either use this as a carving tool or using a paper clip. Smaller paper clip is probably going to be better than the bigger paper clip based on the thickness of the paper clip itself. Might make it easier to do a little bit of carving once we get to that. Then I have just a couple of, this is just a plastic piece off of a gift card. This I can use as a smoothing tool. I'm going to keep this in this state, essentially, as a tool. And then the other thing that I've got is an old gift card that I'm going to show you guys how to cut up and make it as a rib. All right? So, first of all, we're going to get started with the scoring tool. So, with the scoring tool, we're going to go ahead and grab this wine cork. And what I'm going to do with this is I'm going to use my safety pin. And I'm going to use my safety pin and kind of open it up so that way I could come in here and kind of find out where it is that I'm going to be putting these 4 toothpicks. And this is just going to kind of help push down into this because it's a harder metal surface and kind of twist it around a little bit to get it kind of going. And then in terms of our toothpicks, I'm going to take these toothpicks and I'm going to open up my wire cutter and I'm going to cut this in half. And the reason why I want to cut it in half is because then I don't have to stick it so far into the wine cork. So again, I'm going to come back. Oh, I did find my hole. It's a smallish hole. If you have anything else like a leather awl or anything like that, that could be helpful as well just to get the hole started. And then I'm going to take this and get it into that wine cork and start pressing down in, being very careful not to hit my finger on the end of this thing. You can also use needles, right? If you have any needles or pins laying around the house, you can do this same thing with a needle or a pin. It'll make a little finer point, which might be a little bit nicer. But I kind of like the robustness or the thickness of these toothpicks. So I'm going to go in there and get a second hole kind of in there, just kind of get it started, wiggle it around so you can see where it is that you're going to be poking that thing. And then we get that other one in there and very gently start pushing that in as well. And we just keep that going. And we get all 4 of these in place. 4 is a good number for toothpicks because of the thickness of the toothpick. You might be able to get 5 or so in there if you're using pins or needles. Some needles might be a little bit on the thin side, so be careful if you're using the needles. Plus, needles can tend to be a bit sharper than a pin. But it at least gets us in there. Something that could be helpful as well is using these needle nose to be able to grab a hold of this and push it in just a little bit deeper if we need to get into each one of these individual ones to kind of line them up properly so they're at about the same height there. So when we start doing our scoring, we get in the right spot, right? We don't want one of them scoring deeper than the rest of them. We don't get an even score then. And I got my last hole in here. Gonna go ahead and use that needle nose to push this in gently. And again, this pin is just kind of gets our hole started. It's not really, you don't have to push it in there that deep, but it just kind of gets it started, makes it a little bit easier for us. And now we've got a nice scratching tool, so we can use this for doing any of our scratching, our scoring. All right, so that's one tool. Next tool that we're going to talk about is how to make some sort of a carving tool. So I'm going to use this chopstick piece right here, and you can keep the length of it just like so, or if you want to, you can cut it a little bit shorter. I'm going to cut it a little bit shorter just to make it a little bit easier to handle. So I'm going to open up a utility blade, and I'm going to start kind of some of the pine chopsticks are a little bit easier than dealing with this one's a bamboo chopstick, which is a little bit stronger than some of the pine chopsticks. But I'm going to like to use these bamboo ones because it's going to give me a nice strong tool essentially. I feel like it's just going to kind of stay together. Again, just be careful when you're doing any of this stuff, especially when you're using a blade like so. You want to be cutting away from yourself. You don't want to be cutting towards yourself. So that way, if that blade slips, it's going to slip away from you, and then it's not going to injure anyone. All right. So now I've got a nice little handle here for a carving tool. The length of this carving tool doesn't matter, just as long as it fits nicely in your hand. So in terms of making this carving tool, what I can do is I can take this bobby pin and just open up that bobby pin a little bit, like so. And we can position this right on top, essentially, of this. Takes a little bit of fussing. Gonna open it up and get it onto that chopstick. It might be a little bit easier on a square chopstick. I just have round ones laying around, so I'm using those. And so actually it's kind of giving me a little bit of trouble, so I'm going to come and take a little bit of this away, just a little shaving of this on both sides. This will probably also help it so that it doesn't end up slipping on me and slipping away. I am going to end up securing it with a bit of string or floss. Either one will do, but now I've got a little bit of a squared edge right there, okay? So that way I can come over here, open this up, and I don't think it's gonna slip around quite as much on me. Nope, it seems like it's staying in place quite nice. And then see how that's gonna end up making a nice little carving tool, right? Just that little bit, I don't know if I can get closer to show you guys, right? That gives us a nice little area to go around, right? So just for a moment, I'm going to entertain the idea of, if you don't have something like a bobby pin at home, you can use something like a paper clip. Again, these wire cutters are going to come in handy, so I can come into this paper clip and I can cut that paper clip. Using needle nose pliers, I can kind of manipulate this because that's kind of a pretty wide little area to do any sort of carving. So what I can do is I can take these needle nose pliers and I can start to bend this and kind of custom bend it to kind of the sharpness that I maybe want, right? So see how I can make it a little bit more like a little loop, right? So that way this can then be put around that same little handle, and this can create a nice carving tool as well. Kind of looks a lot like our trimming tools that we have back at school, but the carving tool is going to have a little bit more of a sharpness to it, and even once it's on there I can kind of manipulate it, make it a little bit more pointy at the end. Just being very gentle with the way that I kind of manipulate that so I can get a nice edge so I can carve in there and do some decorative carving onto some of my objects, okay? So, like I said, that's how we're gonna do that. I'm gonna make this one out of this bobby pin. And the bobby pin's a little bit on the long side, so I'm gonna do the same thing. I'm gonna use these wire cutters. We can leave it long, it's no big deal, but I'm just gonna make it a little bit more manageable and use these wire cutters, hopefully. Bobby pin's a little harder to cut than oh, there we go. Just took a little bit more strength to get in there. Cut that. There we go. And now I'm going to go ahead and position this onto our little handle. And now is when something like string or floss is going to come in handy. And so what I'm basically going to do is I'm going to get this bobby pin portion or the paper clip portion positioned onto my handle. Somewhere in the center, somewhere where we have a nice amount for the clay to come through. And then I'm going to cut off a portion of this string or floss, doesn't matter. And now I'm going to start wrapping this. I'm just going to tuck a portion of the string underneath. And then I'm going to go back in the other direction, go back over itself. And I'm going to start to wrap this. And it doesn't have to be neat. It doesn't have to be perfect. You just want to kind of wrap it so you can get some strength on there, holding this object in place, holding this bobby pin or this paper clip onto our handle. We get that positioned on there. I think that you'd probably prefer to use something like thread or string, even like a kitchen twine would work, or a kite string, or anything that you have kind of laying around, right? And then once I get this close, I'm going to bring it over towards this other extra piece that I've got there, and then I'll attempt to give it a little bit of a tie. Kind of didn't leave a ton of room here. And the tie is not that important. It's just going to kind of hold this until I can get some glue on there and allow the glue to dry. The glue is just going to kind of set in there. It's going to soak up into the string, right? So I got a little bit of a knot there, which is all we really need. If you can get a double knot on it, by all means, go for it. Maybe leave yourself a little bit more room than I did, unless you really like a challenge. Okay, And then what I'm going to do is take some white glue. I've got some Eileen's tacky glue, which is a craft glue, but any white glue is going to kind of work. And what we can do is just kind of take this and get some of this white glue and kind of start pushing it into place, right? Kind of allow it to kind of get into all those little threads. Most likely it's going to soak all the way through and into the handle portion itself. I can even take these little pieces, these little ends that I have that are kind of hanging out and come a little bit on the longer side, and I can just drag them around like so and kind of get those into the glue as well. So I don't even have to cut them. I don't really have to prepare anything like that. I can just kind of get it ready by doing this, right? And then get a little bit more glue on there just so I can make sure that I've got it all the way on everything. It's going to hold. It's going to dry up nicely. I could go back to it for another pass once it dries. A lot of these white glues dry rather quickly, which is kind of nice about that. You could even use a super glue in this case. Super glue, crazy glue, whatever you have around. If you have any questions, feel free to send me an email and ask, right? So there we go. There's the carving tool. I'm still going to go in here probably once this is a little bit drier and kind of crimp that down a little bit so it's a little bit, right now, if you can see that there, I'm going to hold it close to the camera. You can see how there's that loop tool there. I want it to be a little bit sharper for a carving tool. So just depending on how wide you want your carve mark to be on your clay, that's what you're gonna go for, all right? And then with something like this, you wanna make sure that you set it somewhere upright, okay? Set it somewhere upright so that it can stay, and that way you're not gonna have anything happen. You could even take a little chunk of your clay and kind of smush it together and then stick it in there, or you could put it into some sort of a small cup, a little small glass or something like that. Or you can even hang it off the edge of the table like so, right? And if it's hanging off the edge of that table, then it's not gonna stick to the table. It's not gonna get all messed up, all right? So, other thing that we're gonna talk about is how to make a rib. So I've got this gift card, leftover gift card. Make sure you use your gift card first. And then what you're gonna do is you're gonna cut. First of all, you can draw if you want to, but we're gonna try and make something like that, that rib shape that we had before. So, with one of our pieces, or with one of our ribs. So I'm just gonna kind of get a nice, kind of gentle curve going on this. So that way if we wanna like do something on the inside of a bowl or a pinch pot kind of a shape, we can do that, right? You know, and we're not tied to whatever it is, whatever the shape of the rib is that we kind of have, we can kind of design our own. This looks a little bit on the sharper end of things, so I'm gonna kind of soften that a little bit. So I'm gonna cut it down. But you can become creative. You can make any kind of shaped rib you really want to. You just wanna kind of have nice curves, essentially. Nice continuous curves that go on there. And then the nice thing about gift cards is that gift cards are typically made out of a plastic or something like that. You know, you could even use an old credit card or an old driver's license you have hanging around, anything that has that kind of same feel to it. You can get yourself a piece of sandpaper like so, and you can use the sandpaper and you can start sanding that edge to kind of bring it into a little bit softer of a curve, so you don't have those edges that were created from you cutting it. A lot of times scissors leave those tooling marks, and then we can use something like a sandpaper to kind of come in here and smooth it out a bit and get a nice elegant curve to it. If you don't have sandpaper at home, a couple of other things that could be helpful. An emery board, which is basically a kind of a throwaway version of a nail file, or if you have a nail file, you can actually use a nail file as well. And you can use that nail file to come through here and kind of sand it. A lot of times nail files and emery boards, they have, they're kind of cool because they have a kind of a coarse side and they have a smooth side. So you can use the coarse side to get most of your work done. And then you can use the smooth side to come on this edge right here and start to kind of do this kind of a number on the edge, right? So that way it's not super sharp. You want it to have a softness to it, okay? So we can just do that to shape, right? This one that's right here, this piece, I actually have this so I can use this to smooth clay if I'm doing any sort of motion on a slab of clay or anything like that. That's something that can be really helpful, okay? And then in terms of a needle tool, a couple of different things. We can essentially take this and use a toothpick as a needle tool, right? Totally would work. The other thing that we can do is we can use, probably gonna be better to use something like this bamboo chopstick if you can find one or if you have any around. And you can use something like a utility blade or this knife to start kind of whittling away and starting to get kind of a sharp edge, a sharp point. Right? And you can just come here and you can start doing this, and then after you get it to the point where it has a very skinny, slender edge to it or point to it, you can come back to it with that sandpaper, with an emery board, with a nail file, and you can kind of smooth things out a little bit, a lot like we're sharpening a pencil, but the way that they would sharpen a pencil a long time ago, before we had nice pencil sharpeners with batteries and all sorts of things like that, okay? So again, you can whittle this away like so, or you can have kind of the other approach would be something like taking a handle, a longer handle, and just connecting onto a needle point, right, like this. So using a toothpick and extending that, same thing like we did for our carving tool, but I'm gonna use like the thread or the floss or a string to kind of wrap around that to create another type of a tool, okay? And then the other thing, if you want to, right, if you have a thick enough paper clip, we can kind of unfold this paper clip, right? Unfold this paper clip like so, and this is gonna actually be a tool as well, right? I can actually take something like this sandpaper and I can be very gentle. You don't want to push real hard on the sandpaper. If we push too hard, then it's just going to go right through it. But if I hold it at a very acute angle, I can start to get a point on the end of this piece of metal. It takes a little bit longer than sanding the wood, but it's going to be a stronger needle tool in the long run if that's the case. And again, we can do something like this as well. We can use the end of one of these thicker paper clips. And then if we have a drill or a drill bit or anything like that at home, we can actually drill a hole, a really small hole inside of there, inside of some sort of a handle, some sort of a piece of wood, and then we can do that, right? We can also use a wine cork like this and we can have that extending out of the back of it. Whatever you can think of to make some sort of a handle, that's what we want to do. All right, maybe you can make a two-sided thing, right? Like I just thought of this. I can have a scoring tool on this side, and then once I get this sharp enough and it's a good, has a nice point to it, I'm gonna take this and then stick that down into this end. So I've got a needle tool on one side, and then I've got a scoring tool on the other side. So lots of different things that we can do. Or if you wanna go for it, this can be your needle tool, right? You don't need a handle for it. Just all depends on how you wanna work with it. Not the most comfortable thing to hang on to, but still, it'll work. All right, so I've got this part that I whittled away, and I'm just holding this piece of sandpaper flat on the table and just kind of spinning it in my fingers as I'm kind of moving it around, so that way I can start to get it to a tip. And trying to keep it round if I can. And so you can see how it's becoming a little bit sharper. So it's kind of like a needle tool, but it's not quite as thin as a needle tool. But that needle tool that I started earlier, using the piece of a paper clip, I've taken that I have that here, and I've used a very small drill bit, and I drilled a small little hole in there, and you can kind of see, hopefully you can see, there's a little bit of glue right at the tip, right? And that glue is in there, and it's holding that in place. And you can see how it's kind of come to a very kind of, maybe you can see a little bit better with a dark background. Let's see. Don't really have anything that dark. Maybe this. Nope, that doesn't work either. But you can kind of see that it's got that little tip, and that's from me just using this and doing the same thing that I'm doing with that wooden one, right? Is doing this just very slowly, gently. This is about, I think this sandpaper is like about 120. If you have fine grit like that, that's great. 120 is probably going to be good. Anything's less than that or finer than that, like a 220 might be a little bit much. Might take a little bit too long for you to get those kind of tips worked out. So anyways, we've got that end of this one. And then the other thing we can do is we can create another tip by taking this and just holding it flat. I don't know if you guys have seen this tool before, but there's a tool that one of the manufacturers sells that has a very, almost like a standard screwdriver, flathead screwdriver. So you can see how it's starting to flatten a little bit right there. So do that on the other side. I'm getting kind of wearing the sandpaper out, so I'll move it to the other side. And start doing a little bit more here. Just holding it in the same position, back and forth, moving to new parts of the sandpaper as I do it. So then I can have a tool shape that's something along these lines. Kind of pretty flat, almost like a chisel tip. And then I'm going to come here on the end of it, kind of give it a little bit of a flatness. So now I've got a double-ended tool there, kind of a needle point or a sharp point on one end and the chisel tip on the other. That could be something that could be useful. Okay, and then with any other chopsticks or anything that you have, just be creative and create tools of any kind, right? This can even be used, the end of it can be used as some sort of a stamp to make nice little indentations on your clay, all right? So again, those are the kind of things that we're going to be looking into in terms of having tools to be able to use at home when we don't have things at home. If you have a garage full of tools, there's a lot of tools in a regular toolbox that could be found and used for making clay tools or just becoming clay tools. If you have access to a 99-cent only store or Dollar Tree or whatever those 99-cent stores are, you can go into a 99-cent store and go peruse through the kitchen section, through the bathroom section, and you may be able to find some other things inside of those areas of the store that you can actually use as ceramic tools. So there's a lot of different stuff that's out there, even though we don't have access to the stuff that we've got at school. That's basically our tools that we're going to be having to use for the remainder of the semester. And then as we're doing some of these projects, if I figure something else out, I will let you guys know, and we'll have a little short demo on how you can go through and make something like that, okay? But yeah, kind of put these tools together and keep them into our arsenal, and we'll be able to make some objects here coming up pretty soon.